Why are there so many idle military service scandals? Why did they elicit so much outrage from the Korean public? And why is there universal male conscription in Korea in the first place? Let's talk about it. Hi everyone, and welcome to Academic K-pop Analysis. I'm a current graduate student who has published my own academic study about K-pop. This is a series where I analyze K-pop in an academic but easy to understand way. Today's video will be about mandatory military service in Korea and K-pop idols. It's a bit outside my normal wheelhouse, but I think it's an interesting topic that deserves to have its own video. If you notice any mistakes, please leave a comment. Now I will give a quick overview of the video. First, I will explain a larger concept within Korean society called militarized modernity. Then, I will quickly go over the history of mandatory military service in Korea from the 1950s to now. Finally, I will discuss how this relates to idols, celebrities, and scandals today. Now let's get into the video! Before diving into the history of military conscription in Korea, I want to introduce a broader description of the relationship between Korea and the military. Militarized modernity is what scholar Sung-Suk Moon describes as the Korean path to modernity resulting from the following Korea-specific situations, namely, the division of Korea, the unending Korean War, the need to create a modern nation by establishing a national identity separate from its past as a former colony of Japan, and making its members into useful and loyal citizens. Militarized modernity refers to an authoritarian imposition of a ruling elite's view of modernity on the populace, as well as mobilizing men and women into dutiful nationals, called gunmin, who would willingly give up their personal rights for the nation. One of the core elements underpinning militarized modernity is the establishment of South Korea as an anti-communist nation contrasted against their archenemy, communist North Korea. This means the state, justified in its pursuit of modernization against the communist threat, can use discipline, surveillance, and institutionalized violence to create unwaveringly loyal and anti-communist gunmin. All of this resulted in the ascendance of militarized national security over any other socio-political issues and justified the construction of the strong modern military and the integration of men's mandatory military service into the organization of the economy. So deeply was military service entwined with the economy, it created a militarized economy in Korea. For example, before the 1988 Equal Employment Law, most businesses required completion or official exemption from military service to apply for certain positions. This usually meant that these jobs were reserved for men, and women need not apply. Many aspects of the militarized economy of South Korea resulted in privileging men and penalizing women, as all men were required to serve in the military, but women were not expected or encouraged to, and thus most women did not receive veteran benefits. Keep the idea of militarized modernity in mind as we go through a brief modern history of mandatory military service in South Korea. While various forms of conscription existed in Korea before the Korean War, such as in colonial Korea or various Korean dynasties, I will be starting at the Korean War for simplicity's sake. With the start of the Korean War in the 1950s, the US-backed authoritarian dictatorship of Syngman Rhee instituted a draft of Korean troops to fight in the war against the North. However, unlike what we will see in later decades, draft evasion in the 50s was rampant. There were 1.3 million total draft dodgers in Korea from 1951 to 1959 out of an approximately 2.7 million eligible young men. This number wasn't just during the active Korean War years, though. There were approximately 300,000 draft evaders in 1953 and 250,000 in 1958, revealing that the rate of draft evasion was massive, even during the post-war period. The main justification to continue the draft to this day, even after the signing of the armistice in 1953, is that the Koreas are still officially at war with each other. This was because at this point, Korea didn't have any widespread government surveillance systems in place to track down its citizens and punish them for draft dodging. They simply could not find them if they changed locations frequently. Additionally, it was seen as a poor man's draft, where the poor go to die gruesome and thankless deaths on the battlefield, while the rich and elite are able to escape this supposedly universal requirement using money, connections, and legal loopholes. The extreme inequality in who had to serve made it easy to justify avoiding service, even by using illegal methods, since the process wasn't perceived as fair in the first place. In 1961, Pak Chung-hee seized power in a military coup. One of his first moves as dictator was to create new laws, making draft evasion extremely difficult and costly. Pak Chung-hee even implemented the special measure for individuals with incomplete conscription duties in 1961, which removed public officials from office who hadn't completed military service. Pak's crackdown on draft evasion, especially those of the privileged class, was the Park regime's way of publicizing military service as an equally mandatory and sacred duty of each individual citizen. Put another way, criminalizing the draft evaders of the privileged class was a way of regaining the trust of the disenfranchised who viewed the sacred duty of national defense as a discriminatory poor man's draft. The classless basis of a draft evader's guilty lifestyle, as well as an opportunity for young men of different backgrounds to amend their mistakes, was emphasized in this article to support the Park regime's new agenda on conscription. Another major reform of Pak's dictatorship was the introduction of the social security system in 1968, which was a precursor to the extensive government surveillance that was enacted after the Yuxing Constitution was officially passed in 1973. The Yuxing Constitution granted Pak Chung-hee unlimited authoritarian rule over nearly all aspects of the government. As the 70s progressed, Pak's regime increased surveillance by revising the resident registration system, which documented, located, and tracked every citizen, a noticeable change from the 50s. In fact, these reforms and surveillance efforts were so successful at preventing draft dodging, there were only 12 draft dodgers total in 1978. This is because these reforms in the larger Yuxing Constitution intensified national surveillance, allowing draft dodgers to be identified and punished more harshly by the government. All of this was justified by the uncertain threat North Korea posed to national security. Increased surveillance in particular was justified as helping to uncover North Korean spies hiding among the populace, since they are the ones who would try hardest to avoid surveillance and military conscription. Therefore, refusing these forms of government surveillance would make you seem suspicious, a potential spy. But legal reforms weren't the only way the Pak regime cracked down on draft dodgers. Pak's regime also managed to secure popular acceptance of conscription through an aggressive conscription policy and the indoctrination of the populace through schools and mass media, with the idea that military security was paramount in the face of the threat from North Korea. The state did not differentiate between draft dodgers and conscientious objectors either. Conscientious objectors are those who have claimed the right to refuse to perform military service on the grounds of freedom of thought, conscience, or religion. It is recognized as a human right by Amnesty International and other international human rights organizations, and South Korea did not legally recognize this right at all until 2018. Before then, South Korea had the largest population of jailed conscientious objectors in the world, stemming from the popular acceptance and normalization of mandatory conscription during this period. The Korean public internalized the vilification of draft evaders and conscientious objectors in the 1970s through local institutions, such as local Military Manpower Administration, or MMA offices, steadily increased surveillance on their surrounding communities. As an example of how thoroughly the vilification of draft evasion was internalized by the Korean public, the MMA office in Kwangcheon Village declared 1974 to be the year of draft evasion eradication and ordered local officials to paint the label "Gipijae Jib," or draft evaders' house, on the doors of their homes so that draft evaders and their families, as President Park had ordered, cannot hold their head up in society. They did so with red paint on the door of Mr. Kim, whose son was a draft evader who left home to find work 10 years earlier. The literal labeling of his home had an extreme psychological effect on the Kim family, as Mr. Kim stated, "I'm embarrassed to raise my face," and attempted to commit suicide by burning his house down, which was promptly stopped by his neighbors. The trauma experienced by the Kim family reveals the severe effect of being consciously and literally marked as social deviants and delinquents. It also reveals the power of normalization that made Mr. Kim accept the power to punish, or quite simply, when punished, tolerate being so. As this example demonstrates, what the Pak regime accomplished was much greater than the sought-for 100% conscription rate. It succeeded in the redefinition and perpetuation of normality. Universal male conscription, as well as the immorality of draft evasion and conscientious objection, became established, solidified, and perpetuated throughout South Korean history as a social norm. Recall at this point the concept of militarized modernity. The concept of militarized modernity certainly became applicable during the Korean War, but exploded during the authoritarian rule of Park Chung-hee's normalization of mandatory military service. Park's dictatorship, which lasted until 1979, was followed by two more military dictatorships, Chae Kyu-ha (1979–80) and Chun Do-hwan (1980–1988), during which military elites enjoyed enormous power in all sectors of society, including politics and business. The military as an institution was shielded from outside criticism and monitoring, and became synonymous with absolute power and corruption. In this context, it was almost unthinkable to question the legitimacy of conscription. Since 1973, and expanded during the 80s, dictators began allowing some exemptions and less risky alternatives to military service, which disproportionately benefited the elite. It was only in the 90s, when Korea democratized and elected its first civilian government, that the morality and inequality of mandatory military conscription could be brought to light by the media without fear of severe state punishment. As mentioned, near the end of Park Chung-hee's dictatorship, subsequent military leaders began to devise complicated categories of military service that subverted the universal conscription system, which became a source of public outrage in the 90s. But why would leaders do this if it undermined the already normalized concept of universal conscription? Well, practically speaking, it is very difficult for a society to achieve a perfect balance between the total number of able-bodied men and the optimum military manpower at a given moment, as once a desirable size and training program are set and achieved, the military cannot easily increase or decrease them. In contrast, the supply of military manpower fluctuates from time to time according to demographic change. When there is an oversupply of manpower, the universal conscription system faces the problem of surplus manpower. So because the size of the conscript cohort in South Korea grew throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the military designed and has maintained various categories of military service recruitment in order to absorb the extra manpower. Thus, alternative military services were created to put the extra number of conscripts they had to use. While this is a logical explanation for why alternative service routes exist, the fact remains that the existence of supplementary service and substitutes for military service allowed the upper classes to select less onerous forms of military service by using connections and money. During former President Kim Young-sam's administration, the media released statistical information of military service completion by region and economic status, fanning the flames of public anger as the statistics confirmed the public's suspicions of inequality in military service. This anger is reflected in the common saying that those exempted from military service are sons of God, those who perform supplementary service are sons of generals, and those who perform regular service are sons of human beings. After the Asian financial crisis in 1997, which halted the South Korean economy in its tracks, the media began to vigorously expose military service evasion by politicians, athletes, and celebrities at a faster and more ferocious rate than before, taking us closer to the modern day. So, how does this affect idols? If you're a fan of K-pop or K-dramas, you've probably heard about a famous male idol or actor's enlistment scandal, where they are criticized for either dodging or finding an alternative to mandatory military service. DKDK-TV did a great summary of one of the biggest enlistment scandals of all time, which resulted in the extremely popular 90s singer Seungjoon Steve Yu being exiled from Korea to this day, which I will link in the description. Why is there so much uproar about idol or celebrity military service specifically? Well, although the media vigilantly polices the public sphere by exposing the inequality of military service, as we saw earlier in the example of the Kim Young-sam administration, the media tends to overemphasize celebrity cases rather than political or economic elite cases, where there are rarely legal repercussions. This means that news of celebrities avoiding military service sets fire to a whole powder keg of built-up resentment of unjust application that the non-elite populace identifies with. And unlike the strictly political or financial elite, the powerless elite that is a celebrity can be persecuted for relevant transgressions. Because a celebrity's power in large part comes from public opinion and fame, they can effectively be tried and found guilty in the court of public opinion. The political and financial elite cannot be held accountable by using the court of public opinion to ruin their careers like with entertainment celebrities. Thus, the political and financial elite cases receive less constant attention in the media and create less concentrated, constant public outrage, because regular citizens can't directly do anything to change it themselves. This also has to do with immediate incentives for views. People are more likely to click on a story about a beloved celebrity than a relatively unknown businessman or politician, so more media attention is directed towards coverage of celebrity military scandals. This way, they can be perceived as holding the elite accountable without actually risking conflict with the infinitely more powerful political or financial elite. I don't want anyone to think that I am saying Korean media doesn't cover political or financial elite cases of avoiding military service at all. They absolutely do. The difference that the academic article I am citing from points out is that there is less overall coverage of political or financial elite military scandals and less overall public outrage compared to celebrity cases. This lack of coverage could be because the reduced public outrage gives less incentive to continue covering it, or vice versa, but correlation doesn't equal causation, so this is just a theory. Ultimately, what this means is that while the media is obsessed with bringing justice to the celebrity cases, fundamental reform to address and prevent corruption by the political and financial elite are lacking in issues such as the fact that South Korea houses the absolute majority of jailed conscientious objectors in the world have yet to generate much media attention. However, military service doesn't only result in scandal and harm to a celebrity's career. On the one hand, any celebrity's attempt to evade military service duty is widely publicized as a scandal by the media and severely condemned. On the other hand, a well-choreographed performance of active duty generates immense positive publicity and significant image enhancement. In some cases, it may even result in a much-needed career boost that can make over a previously tarnished reputation. We can see this in the case of Psy, who was tried in the court of public opinion for using his celebrity connections to get an alternative assignment in IT for his military service. But after going back to the military a second time in active duty, he left with a boost to his career. But it's not just military conscription scandals. A male celebrity can repair his image from most scandals by entering the military and, depending mostly on the celebrity's pre-scandal status, emerge unscathed or even with a more masculine and mature image from the service after completion, unless the service is not completed dutifully. Think of Big Bang Seungri entering the military after his gigantic Burning Sun scandal, which I will link some info about in the description. We will see the result of Seungri's service soon. Hopefully it doesn't repair his reputation after he did horrible things. Male celebrities can repair their image from scandals by going to the military because whether or not the scandal is conscription related or not does not seem to matter as long as the male celebrity involved enters the military and performs his duty, after which he is exonerated and reinstated into the entertainment industry as well as accepted by the public as a matured man who has accomplished this critical rite of passage. Can you guys think of any other celebrity situations where this has happened? This points to another reason for widespread acceptance and normalization of mandatory military service in Korea, the close link between gender, military, and citizenship. What this means is that military conscription and citizenship are still entangled with traditional ideas of national belonging, the ideal of equality among citizens, and geopolitical tension with North Korea. As such, contrary to the trend of weakening military service citizenship linkages observed in other industrialized countries, the linkage has tightened in Korea. In order to be a real Korean man, not just a boy or for a foreigner in the militarized modernity of Korean society, one must complete his military service rite of passage and receive an honorable discharge. While I don't want to get too deep into this here, the gendered nature of citizenship in Korea also gives us an explanation for why girl groups are regularly sent to perform for the troops. While Korean women are not expected to serve their country by joining the military, they are expected to serve their nation in different ways, like being housewives, birthing and raising children, and supporting their husbands who do have to go to war. Therefore, girl groups performing at military bases are another manifestation of Korea's militarized modernity. Girl groups support the nation by boosting male soldiers' morale through reminding them of the women, children, and motherland they are protecting. It reminds troops of their duty to the patriarchal nation to defend women and children from external threats. In sum, modern universal conscription for Korean men began during the Korean War. It continued even after the armistice was signed in 1953 because this armistice did not officially end the war, it only created a ceasefire. But draft dodging was still rampant during this period due to the non-existent government surveillance and image of being a poor man's draft. But this changed during the dictatorship of Park Chung-hee, who implemented massive government surveillance and discipline programs to ensure mandatory conscription for all, even the elite. However, in the 70s and 80s, more alternative service positions and exemptions were created that disproportionately benefited the elite, making it a poor man's draft once more. But the societal normalization of the draft did not disappear. Rather than demanding to abolish the draft, Korean citizens demanded more equality in military service. Once Korea democratized in the 90s, this allowed the media to point out more elite inequality in military service. However, it usually gives more attention to celebrity scandals rather than political or financial elite military service scandals. Public outrage is also usually directed towards the powerless elite of the celebrity rather than the political or financial elite, as it is the only elite type of scandal the public has the power to directly affect. Conversely, male celebrities can gain public adoration after a scandal by dutifully completing frontline military service, making them a real Korean man. All of this shows the deep links between the economy, military, and gender in Korean society, and reveals how it culminates into the militarized modernity of Korea. Hey guys, thanks for watching. What do you all think? I released my last video on Westernization versus Korean culture if you want to give that a watch. Do you have any other questions or need more clarification on anything we've covered? Please leave a comment. I also welcome any nicely worded constructive criticism on my video, so please let me know if you have any. All of the sources are linked in the description as well as my social media. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. That should be all for now. Bye!